Welcome back to DWeb Decoded, a podcast by Filecoin Foundation that explores the intersection of blockchain and the data economy. I'm your host, Aaron Stanley, and today our guest is Pete Pachal, who's the founder of Media Copilot, which is a platform examining how AI is changing media, journalism, and the news industry. Pete, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure, Aaron. Pleasure to reconnect.
Yeah, absolutely. So Pete and I spent a couple of years in the trenches at CoinDesk in our previous life, but we are back here in the AI age as podcasters and content creators. So, but here on DWeb Decoded over the last few months, we've been working through a mini series exploring decentralization and media with the aim of really understanding how blockchain AI tools are impacting and perhaps disrupting the traditional media business model. So when we started planning this out, I was like, oh man, we have to have Pete Pachal on because he's really become the go-to guy when it comes to this sort of thing. So Pete, I'd love for us to get started by just tell us a bit about Media Copilot. Like, what is it? Give us some context about maybe what led you to start this project and focus on this particular niche.
Yeah, for sure. So we, like you said, we both were working together at CoinDesk for a while. And when I was there was this little app that debuted in the fall of 2022 called ChatGPT, which pretty quickly took over all of public consciousness, it seemed. And I remember I didn't quite catch the announcement because I was doing some other stuff, but I started seeing in CoinDesk people doing articles, the standard, hey, this article was written by ChatGPT, can you tell? And there was sort of like a meta, like, here's the article and here's my analysis of it. And this is like, GPT 3.5. So a lot of it wasn't super great, but it was sort of impressive for what it could do, right? And so pretty quickly, this became apparent, oh, wow, this is sort of changing how content is going to be done. Like, obviously, even if you look at it not being that great, it was only, as they always say in AI, today is the worst it's ever going to be. And so that's certainly proven true for how good AI is good at writing. And even prior to this, AI had been a presence in media. I remember one of my reports at CoinDesk had actually gone to a conference a couple of months previous to that and sort of talked about like, oh, look at all this sort of AI driven stuff, whether it was like newsroom stuff or audience driven stuff. So it was kind of on our radar to do something about it. And then ChatGPT happened. And I was like, okay, we got to do something. So I was the chief of staff there. I essentially assembled a team, an internal committee of interested people to figure out what we were going to do. And we talked about it. And we figured out some guidelines, and I actually wrote the guidelines. They're still on the site. And how are we going to approach this from an editorial perspective? And that's all well and good. But then it was like, it came time to do some prototyping, what are we actually going to do with this? And we actually figured out a couple good use cases, and I could go into those details, but I think more in terms of a vibe, you could definitely tell there was a lot of excitement from all over the company, but also a lot of skepticism, and a lot of that coming from the newsroom. Now, some of this was justified, right? Because even around the same time, there were like these, what I kind of look back on now is sort of the dead end paths of using AI in media, which was kind of like, let's try it at scale. Let's try this. Can we do articles at scale? Can we get robots to write things? And pretty quickly, a lot of companies found out like, no, you really can't, because it's not good enough. And there's a lot of problems when even if you do have like quote unquote human in the loop, there's still a lot of things to consider. Not the least of which is, what does it do to your audience relationship? Are those people who are doing editing subject matter experts? There's a lot of more nuance than just like, oh, we should check the stuff. And so in our use cases, we kind of were looking at some sort of more sort of on the periphery of like things, not actual like articles. And that was really great. And we actually got one of those use cases in action. But what happened, the whole story of CoinDesk is well documented. They had several rounds of layoffs. I was in one of them. And then once I was trying to figure out what I would do next, I knew I loved doing the AI stuff. That was like probably some of the most fun I've had at CoinDesk, was working with a bunch of folks to figure out what we were going to do with it. And I also knew I knew media. So I was like, well, let's put those two things together, and kind of gave myself my own job, right? Like I was like, okay, I launched the Media Copilot in November 2023. And I kind of didn't quite know what I was doing other than like, I knew I was a journalist. I knew I could write. So I was going to be a Substacker. I was going to basically turn this into a newsletter and teach myself everything I could about the intersection of these things, AI and media, and then pass it on to my readers, right? And that was great. I got a lot of great feedback on the launch and the writing. And then really in less than a month, some contacts of mine in New York were reaching out, hey, can you come into my office and teach my team this AI stuff? And I was kind of, oh, sure, I could do that. And so I did. This is, again, very shortly after I launched the newsletter, and it went super, super well. And I did another one, also went well. And I thought, this could be a thing. And so I sort of formally launched courses in 2024, but not just like general AI courses. It was like AI for media and media adjacent. Like I really wanted to sort of bring mostly newsrooms into this sort of brave new world and show them, specific use cases that you could do in terms of research, in terms of, helping you brainstorm things or even like guide your writing. And all the other things around that. Like one of the great use cases, I think, for most sort of people working in as a reporter or an editor is that everyone over the last decade had to become like a content marketer of their own content and promote it on social and learn how to optimize their headlines for SEO and all that stuff. It's such a great job for a bot. And this is the thing that like everyone gets excited about. Oh, it's actually going to make my life that much easier. Like you don't have to do it, but at least the bot can take the heavy lifting of that sort of menial task that everyone sort of has at the end of writing their article. And it's great. And so that sort of is a good sort of path to getting people on board. And, that among a ton of other use cases I now teach, and PR teams have come to me. I've got a great relationship with a lot of PR teams from when I was a tech journalist. So they've actually become my main clientele. And, I've got some consulting on top of that too. So really what Media Copilots become, in addition to sort of a newsletter and a podcast, is basically an AI transformation assister, if that's a thing. Basically, I help media companies and journalists sort of transition into the AI era with very specific material and advice for them, either on the ground level on how to use tools or sort of the macro level of like what should your overall thinking and strategy be around this. So that's what I do.
Yeah, I love that, and I love how you like at the end there you alluded to the kind of these the two prongs of the thesis here. Like, there's the as the journalist who is like in the trenches, like how can I use these tools to make my life a little bit easier, make researching easier, not have to worry about all this kind of boring SEO stuff that or content marketing stuff that I'd rather not spend my time working on. But then also on the how does this kind of fundamentally impact the business model, right? And I think that's like maybe the big kind of $1 million question right now that people are trying to figure out is like, what's going to be the role of journalists in 10 years? Like, will we exist or will we all be robots, or like what's going to happen here? So there's two kind of like super just relevant, very timely, very, very critical, like kind of conversational points I want to touch on here in this conversation with you today. Maybe start off with since that time, since 23 or 22 when ChatGPT first came out, we've seen, it's been 2+ years, but like just the flow of tools it's just being continually like one thing after another being released into the market. It's really difficult to keep up with.
Tell me about it, dude.
You're the guy in the front lines here. So, just give some color. Like, how is this all changing? Like, how is this how is this impacting the daily workflow of journalists and creators? How are you kind of helping people like stay ahead of the curve when there's just so much stuff coming out at such a frantic pace? Yeah,
that sort of final point is very well taken by everyone in the industry, and even people like if you're not like, I obviously immerse myself in all this stuff because I think about it all day. For those that can't or don't, like, I have no idea like what you're doing other than maybe calling me and asking me to give you a quick, like, you can always do that, but yeah, it's been insane, quite frankly. And it's one of the reasons it's been difficult for me to offer courses on demand as part of my business model, because things change so much. The way I was teaching prompting, 6 months ago isn't really relevant anymore. Deep research didn't exist. Notebook LM didn't exist. And these things are now very central to the conversation in AI. and I'm just constantly needing to develop new things. I teach a 6-week course now on using AI in PR scenarios. For the second course, the second lesson in that, I had to tear it all up because Perplexity had just come out with deep research, which had made my previous lesson obsolete, and I had to sort of integrate it and make it much more updated. And you just got to have to do that. You got to roll with that. So yeah, this rapid pace of things is it rings very true to me when people say, hey, even if AI development stopped today, which it clearly isn't, but even if it stopped today, it would take years for the full ramifications of all these tools to really be felt. But sort of getting it down to that sort of, I guess, micro level on how are people using it, and then sort of expanding to the macro level, because obviously it's related, right? Like how journalists are using it and how audiences are using it is greatly affecting like how the business should even think about it. But like thinking it like journalists and like how they create stories, right? So I think of it as almost like 3 sections of a pipeline, or you could even think of it as 3 buckets, but I like the pipeline because it's like a story goes through sort of a research ideation phase, and then there's a writing phase, like creating the story, and then there's a editing distribution phase, right? So, there's more to it than that, but that's broadly it. Sort of, the beginning, the before, during, after of a story. So out of the box, coming in with a fairly, if you're not that experienced with AI, the best places to apply it are the first place and the last place, like basically stage 1 and stage 3. So right now, I think it'd be hard to find a journalist who isn't at least using AI in a research kind of context. Like you're probably going to Perplexity or ChatGPT search. Maybe not for every query. I know I still use Google a lot because, as sort of a power user of the internet, you kind of have a vibe with Google that you probably don't even realize. Like you search and you're doing a lot of what Perplexity does in analyzing that page of links, it just in your head. And in some cases, Perplexity is better at sort of finding what's in those links and finding you the right answer. But sometimes the point is that process. You know what I mean? So that's kind of an interesting thing that I found with these things where for power users, the old tools sometimes still are better. But that said, Perplexity works very well at getting good answers. There's a lot of things that are like Perplexity and ChatGPT search that are specific for like academic research, which I know I would have found invaluable when I was doing sort of daily posts on various things. So AI is certainly being used there. And then there's also like brainstorming, running things by AI, getting good ideas out of you. Data analysis, like every journalist can kind of be a data journalist to some extent now because of how good these things are just out of the box at, figuring out what's in a data set. So that's that. So you're doing a lot of sort of AI enhanced stuff there. Then you get to sort of stage 2 in the writing of it. And, most newsrooms, most legit newsrooms anyway, sort of have a very strict rules about what AI can do at that phase in terms of writing. A lot of places say just don't do it, which I totally understand. And again, I'm not judging one way or the other. Like, I think that's when you're writing a story, particularly for, junior to mid-level reporters, a lot of the times the writing exercise is the thinking and learning exercise. And that's really, really important. Like you can't lose that in terms of the story generation. And like I think I'm not saying that like there are certainly use cases I think that where writing in AI might work in a publishing environment. And so we're starting to see more of that. So the most notable example is like ESPN is now using essentially AI written write-ups of games for leagues they don't really cover. It would be prohibitive to actually hire a reporter because the audience is so low, but now they can have AI write it and have some editing, and then it's kind of okay. We'll see how that shakes out. So far, it seems to be doing okay for them.
Or even for like company like earnings reports, right? Like article write-ups. So like for like obscure companies that most people don't really care about. It's like, oh, they reported, 15 earnings per share, type of thing.
And even in the ones they do care about, you could have a greater role for AI than just don't use it. You know what I mean? Like particularly, even if it was something like Apple, like AI can definitely crunch the numbers and summarize the relevant takeaways very quickly. And then a human can sort of put in finishing touches and add more as that. So when it's very timely, when it's very numbers driven, there's an AI enhanced process there that you could probably go beyond. Again, applied carefully, applied with the proper editorial process, but you could do it. And then there is the last phase is definitely, like we already sort of talked about, the promotion and the SEO. There's more and more editing that can be done by AI. Very common to at least have Grammarly or a similar app to be a layer within that process, which is funny because that can sometimes lead to AI detection where there isn't AI. I've definitely known that. So that's kind of the ground level of that. So what to sort of project out, because part of your question was like the business model and what does this use of AI mean? So one is like you can kind of produce more with less, but I think one of the important things, certainly one of the most important things that's a trend at the macro level, is how audiences are using AI. So right now, ChatGPT is probably the most popular sort of way people are getting information online. I'm hesitant to call it a search engine because even though it can search, that wasn't always quite what it was, as opposed to Perplexity, which has always been a search engine and doesn't have nearly as much market share. That said, it's all a drop in the bucket compared to Google. Now, Google's doing a little bit of AI, not a lot right now. Like they're actually doing their overviews, but they're explicitly not doing it for news, right? If you go to Google News, it looks exactly the same as it did 5 years ago or 10 years ago, pretty much. There's no AI summaries of trends yet. There's a myriad reasons for this because of, one, it would just upend the ecosystem, and there's been obviously lawsuits with ChatGPT and Perplexity, and as big as Google is, there's some hesitancy there, and also it's probably not quite ready. But the point is, people are getting more and more of their information from summarization. And so what does that mean? Well, it means now instead of competing for SEO, the top spot on the search page, you're now sort of competing to be in this summary. And that's, even though it's very, very similar to SEO, there's a different set of variables and a different approach to that informational sort of summarization. And it means that as you create those articles, like you kind of have to optimize for that. And as far as we can tell so far, it's still fairly new, but like how these engines identify those articles, the old tricks aren't going to work. The stuff that gave us essentially SEO garbage, right? Like where everyone would do the same story and not really add much and they'd reblog. That's been on the decline for a while. And I think AI is pretty much going to kill that. Like, okay, for starters, those articles, if you're not adding anything, probably could be written by AI. But also AI engines aren't going to reward it. They're going to go find the definitive source and make that sort of the focus of their summary if they're working properly, right? So in other words, this is sort of one of the foundational pillars of an argument I like to make, which is that while AI may be painful for journalists, it is healthy for journalism because, caveating if it's designed correctly, that it is optimizing for the sort of definitive articles that I'm talking about. It's going to look for things that are unique. It's going to look for things that are bringing new information to the conversation. It's going to look for original sources, all the things like we used to just call good journalism, right? That's what you're supposed to be doing. Like, somehow in the 2010s, because of the incentives of search and social media, we got sort of into this rabbit hole as an industry of kind of regurgitating things and chasing clicks and impressions on social. And we all know how that ended, right? Like it was all this just bad incentives, a lot of clickbait and those terrible lists we would tap on or click on in Facebook that we all felt bad about clicking on because it was like, well, I just wasted a ton of time. That it's not just AI. There's a lot of reasons why that declined, but like now AI, I think there's an opportunity to kill it dead essentially and get back to good journalism. The problem is that's harder. That inherently means a smaller industry. It's kind of a filtering factor in a lot of these places because they have built themselves around a lot of these digital first publications, built themselves around those old scale media strategies. And now they need a completely different strategy for the age of AI.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, and while the media, these business models have been built up around this strategy, I think most journalists who get into this business are, they don't get into this because they want to be writing bottom feeder SEO clickbait articles, right? Or like listicles and things of this nature. It's just not like really why they got into the business. So, but that's just kind of what you had to do to play the game, right? To be relevant. So that's super interesting that if almost taking it a next level from what you're saying, there's this whole cottage industry around SEO, SEO specializations and all these tools and kind of professionals and consultants around how to get your page ranked at the top of Google, et cetera. And, it seems like from what you're saying, like this, but applied for how do you get your stuff picked up in these AI summarization tools is kind of going to become the new search engine optimization, essentially.
With one very important caveat, it's kind of a meta caveat, which is the fundamental question of it. Why would you want to, right? Like if you're ranking in AI search, in other words, you're getting in those summaries, that's great. You're still not going to get a lot of clicks compared to like getting on page one of Google 10 years ago. So what is your monetization and audience strategy on top of an AI first strategy, right? And so that's a really important thing to think about. Now, a lot of the economy around this is still being figured out, but we're seeing some broad consensus emerging, which is that, licensing is kind of the way. And, in the case of Perplexity, they're kind of have a slightly different approach, which is rev share. But in other words, you need some business model attached to this strategy. You can't just go like, I was summarized first in the ChatGPT queries that are around this object. Well, great. I mean, how did you get audience? Did you get money? Like what did you get out of that? That's great. You've got to sort of figure that out for yourself. And there is a sort of component to this that I think justifies some of these sort of bad chat experiences. One of the things about applying AI in media is that it's difficult to do it in an audience experience way that isn't that is good, right? There's not actually, frankly, not a very good audience experiences that are AI driven out there. The good ones are fairly like minor, right? Like it'll be like bullet points that are summarized at the top of articles, and which is great. Or spoken word articles are great, but again, it's not really moving the needle. But the idea of offering chat on your site, though, even though some of these things are not that great, is very helpful from a strategy perspective, because it's going to give you guidance on what your most loyal readers, the people who are by definition loyal, are on your site fairly often, and what are they interested in, and then from those queries and from how they're using the site, you can kind of infer at least a little bit of like how people are behaving on these more general purpose engines, whether it's a Perplexity or whatever. And so I would encourage like anyone in media who's like, what should we do? Like if they're not doing anything, or if they haven't progressed from experimentation and kind of an ad hoc approach to AI, I would think about that. Like, okay, if we can offer an experience, even though it's not really differentiated in terms of like, chatbots are everywhere, it is your chatbot. You have the data and you're doing it with your audience. So use that, and understand that behavior of interacting with chat and sort of looking at summaries or whatever is something everyone's doing at large. And, to the best of your ability, sort of unpack it and see how you can better compete in these other places. But the main thing is like have that business strategy attached to your AI strategy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's going to be, I think, one of the most interesting questions moving forward is how folks figure out how to monetize this type of engagement, right? Or this type of, it's like, okay, we got it. Yeah, we got into the summary of ChatGPT, but like we're still living off the dollar menu because we didn't get paid. There's no money involved. So maybe on that point, like I'd like to touch on some of the, what are some of like the biggest like problems or just other like controversial elements that we see emerging here? Obviously, when there's a technological shift like this, there's going to be a lot of, there's going to be some conflicts. There's going to be some disruption. I think both like on the technical side and on like the ethical side, and also on the business model side, like we've touched on here. But thinking of things in terms of like, the licensing, in terms of like data privacy. There's obviously a big lawsuit between OpenAI and New York Times. about, New York Times accusing OpenAI of just sort of, scraping all the data for use in the training model. And then also even with things like, just like the provenance of content, right? So how do we know that this is not just like sort of a garbage in, garbage out situation? Like, how can we kind of trust the information that's being fed into these models, et cetera, et cetera? But we'd love for you to kind of riff on that some a bit. Like, what are some of the biggest, like, maybe pain points here, or biggest sort of, looming problems that people are really trying to, really wrestling with right now on this front?
Yeah, that's a lot of stuff, but let's sort of unpack them one at a time. So I think the main one that is truly existential for media is the copyright question, and there's a couple different sort of layers to it, and I'd say it's hard to separate it without sort of getting a little nerdy about the technology, So how I think about it is that there are there's AI training, and that is used these sort of big data sets that, Common Crawl scrapes the whole internet, essentially indexes it, and then sort of gives that out to AI companies. There's other data sets certainly, but that's sort of the one that's cited the most. And they use they train the AI models on them. And then did they have the right to do that in the first place? And I don't think, I wrote about this recently, I don't think it would have been brought up in quite the same way or as urgently if ChatGPT never existed. Because if you think of the model itself, like just this general purpose knowledge engine, forget the chatbot, like it's just there to be used by some software. That's, you could argue that's a copyright violation. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but it is like that seems a little more like what Google's doing with search, right? And it's only when you put the chatbot on top of it and then are like, use this for general knowledge and tell people to do that, which is what they did with ChatGPT, essentially. That's when it's like, wait a minute. This thing now is giving people, customers, the information that they're asking for, and I'm not getting the traffic. And so then it's like, okay, that's an issue. And so it's sort of in the application of that general knowledge. That said, that's sort of, I feel like, the layer where all the publishers obviously have the strongest point, and they're starting to get some victories in the courts anyway. So there was a recent ruling, it was between Reuters and actually a now defunct AI company. It predated ChatGPT, that they had used their sort of legal database to create answers. They won the case. A lot of people are going to point to that for precedent in these looming lawsuits that you mentioned. That's for sure. And now, since then, both the OpenAI and Google are lobbying the government. They're saying, hey, we can't let China take everything because they're just going to do that. So you got to give us a pass. But again, they kind of have a point too. Like, it's true. Like, if we end up forcing AI companies to either license everything for everything they do, then you're kind of, I wouldn't say they're not necessarily crowning the China the king of AI, but it does make things a little harder, right? They're going to have to spend resource on doing some kind of licensing for this. So all of that is well taken, but that sort of application layer of AI, that I mentioned, is even more. Again, I'm getting a little detailed and nerdy here, but trust me, I'm going somewhere with it. Which is to say that what Perplexity does is a little different from training, right? And then now ChatGPT does it too with search, because search is different from knowledge, right? Like if you were asking ChatGPT something prior to search, like last September, it would go into its knowledge base. Like if you asked it about the French Revolution, what caused the French Revolution, it would come out and sort of like, well, this is what my knowledge base says. Chances are there'd be a couple hallucinations in there at least, and it'd be, passable, but something you have to check. Now with search, it's literally going to the web, and that's not training data. That's like, that's inference is what they call it in the business, right? It's like it's doing a search, it's kind of inferring what everything means and then bringing you the summary of that. And Perplexity's always been doing that. So that's a great service. But that seems to me anyway, that where the copyright question is most relevant, and where I think the media companies have the biggest case. Because if you're like a news operation and someone is saying like, I want to take that content that you're producing every day, summarizing it and giving it to someone else, that really feels a lot more like syndication than search. So that seems to be the consensus that's emerging. And even Perplexity, like I say, Perplexity is doing rev share rather than licensing. So it's got a different approach, but at least it acknowledges that, oh yes, there should be some economy here where this goes back to the media. So all these things, like I mentioned, in terms of the courts, in terms of lobbying the government about the threat from China, are going to affect what these settlements are and the fair price that media companies can get for this. Because right now it's okay. It's not going to save everybody. But if you think of like, these licensing deals from ChatGPT are decent, right? Like there's like either single digit millions or double digit millions per year or whatever, depending on the size of your company. If you multiply that by the number of portals that there could be, you think about, okay, Meta wants them, Microsoft wants them, Perplexity is going to have something comparable. Hopefully they grow, maybe they don't, I don't know. Even Amazon, right? They're going to have the smart Alexa, and it's going to be telling you the news and summarizing things. All these are well-moneyed tech companies. Yeah. This could end up being, for at least some publishers, a pretty decent line item. Possibly even as this technology progresses and user behavior changes, fairly lucrative. The big question mark in all this, beyond just the courts and the legality of it, is what's Google going to do? Because Google historically has not done these kinds of deals. It hasn't licensed the content in its search engine. And up until now, it has been looking at it as like it is search, right? Again, this is sort of notwithstanding some things it's done with the Canadian government, News Corporation. Like there's chinks in the armor of Google in terms of being able to do whatever it wants. So I don't, it'd be hard for me to see a future where Google does nothing, and just decides it's going to summarize news and, tough break publishers. Like, I don't think that's going to happen, but I also don't think they want to necessarily go down the extreme of no big company that I mentioned, as well moneyed as they are, wants to go down the extreme of giving deals to every single content creator, right? And essentially putting some kind of YouTube AdSense layer on top of things. That said, there are a lot of startups that are trying to do that. You have like Tollbit is probably the one that's talked about the most. Tollbit is like a well-funded startup. It's trying to build essentially a marketplace between AI companies and publishers. There's about a half dozen others that are sort of in that orbit. That's definitely a solution. So hopefully, like it's a combination of these things, but a lot is riding on whether the government gives them a pass or whether the courts give them a pass. You had asked about some of this decentralization, or at least the data privacy with, and those are very related. In fact, I feel like with decentralized AI, which is the thing, and it's becoming a bigger thing. A lot of people, normies would ask, like, what's the point? Like, we already have AI, why are we doing this? It's like a similar argument to, the crypto and blockchain area. Like, why do you need this internet money? We already have money. I mean, a lot of those argue the fundamental sort of stuff applies in that, the sort of libertarian and ownership and identity aspects. But I think the data privacy aspect resonates with everybody. Every single class I've taught, every single student, even whether it's an organization or a person, is like, what happens to my stuff when I give it to AI? Like I want to use it with my sensitive data, with my finances and my embargoed stuff or whatever. Should I? And it's it's obviously not a yes or no answer. It's like, well, you probably want to be cautious, certainly. But you need some kind of systemic approach to that, lest you just not use it. You'll completely underutilize it, or worse, you forbid, if you're a company, you forbid everyone in your company from using it, but they do it anyway because they just want to use AI. That's definitely, like I would say, if anyone who has blanket rules about AI in the organization, get more nuanced quickly, because people are using AI, you just don't see it. That's called shadow AI. So here's where I think decentralized AI can really play a role, is that, well, even with privacy controls with AI, and everyone has privacy. You can turn off sharing in ChatGPT, but certainly enterprise plans or even using the APIs will ensure the data is not retained. You still have to send it to their cloud, the data, because it has to use it. It has to work on it with its AI. So it's going to leave your premises. And for a lot of people, that's kind of a little icky. And then there's if there's enterprise platforms that also use the API. Those are getting popular. A lot of them are actually better than ChatGPT and things like collaboration, which is kind of cool. But then you have another vendor in the mix. It's like, okay, wait a minute. Now I've got to trust this guy and ChatGPT with my data, and they're all guaranteeing this encryption and whatever. But it's a lot you're asking of say a law firm or whatever. So I think the role decentralized AI can play, and I think the best selling point is the fewer entities essentially that you need to trust on that path, the better, which is again, the whole point of decentralization, right? It's trustless. You don't have to worry. It's the system and it's just kind of unhackable. And then you can do it. If you understand it. So this is, it's again, a question of education, but I would love to see that question, not necessarily muted, but this is essentially decentralized AI coming out as more of a solution to people who want extreme privacy. Sure, because the only other option then is doing it locally, right? And that's expensive and cumbersome.
Right.
Yeah, sure, I can download Llama to my laptop and run it, but come on, it's going to take an hour just to give me a recipe for an old fashioned. It's just how these things work. They just you get a small model, right? But I mean, even then, you're you will never get the user experience you get from a cloud service like ChatGPT, which is running whatever thousands of NVIDIA H100s or whatever the Blackwell or whatever the new thing is. So running AI locally, I mean, it's a thing you can do, but I think you can have the best of both worlds with a decentralized solution that is just very respectful of privacy and doesn't ask so much trust of the user.
That's super interesting. I appreciate the color there. I want to, running out of time here, so I just want to wrap up with you've painted a picture here that's frankly a lot more rosy than what I was expecting to come out of this conversation. I'm oh wow, maybe this isn't it's not a doomsday situation here, but it does seem like there is these tools now. I mean, these tools are giving I like how you put it earlier, but these tools can allow us to get away from just this kind of SEO clickbait spam stuff and go back to trying to create real value added content and hopefully that these AIs will be trained and be able to really find value added content that's novel, that's well sourced, that's providing some value to the reader, and it's not just regurgitating other people's stuff. I guess maybe my final question would be for somebody who's looking to really kind of stay ahead of the curve on this stuff, what's the advice that you give folks? I mean, aside from taking your course, I suppose, which they could certainly do that, but
Copilot.ai.
But how should folks who are maybe either in the content creator side or in the on the journalist side or on the PR side, maybe be thinking about how how should I be positioning my, not just so much how do I use ChatGPT or how do I use such and such tool, but how do I kind of position myself to really if there is going to be kind of a renaissance of media in some sort that AI unlocks, how can I position myself to really kind of ride this wave essentially?
So for any individual or organization, I think the conventional wisdom, which I agree with these days, is go niche, right? Lean into what your expertise is. And the way AI can help that is, you can kind of do anything. That's a little glib, I admit, but it is just in my usage of it alone, right? It takes a little while to sort of get in the habit and the mindset. But this idea is AI is this life and skill collaborator. The things you thought you could do, I mentioned sort of one thing earlier, every journalist can kind of now be a data journalist. Like that's true, right? Like if you didn't know what to do with spreadsheets and statistics and you were more of a writer, well, now like you don't have to know. Like ChatGPT knows or Claude knows. Like they know what to do with this stuff. Just as a solopreneur, doing things even just like my website and things I would turn to the marketing team for when I was at a newsroom or the social team or whatever, and I just wouldn't have the first clue how to do. Now it's like, oh, I can just ask like literally specific things like coding, even like, okay, I have a website. What coding should I add to my CSS here to make the margins more? Like again, I don't have a team. I have ChatGPT though, and it can just turbocharge like all of this stuff and let me sort of simulate having skills in all these areas. So I would say the main way, like, there's very specific things I teach in the courses, of course, but the main thing I would emphasize to people is like get an AI mindset, make it your first stop for when you don't know how to do something or don't even know where to start. Like I feel like, it's a little different from Google in that way. Cause like Google and YouTube, yeah, they have how-to videos and Google always could provide links, but sometimes you don't even quite know what you're looking for. And an AI is actually really good at sort of that conversation. And you start to more and more you use it this way, the more you start to realize the conversation is kind of the point. It's not really the output, if you know what I mean. Like that's, I think, what people immediately sort of thought of ChatGPT, like almost like this Star Trek replicator for content, give me this, give me that, give me this. And it would be sort of somewhat synthetic, but it was passable. And that's still true. And it's getting better than just passable, but it's sort of better used as like an iterative process and just kind of like, even if it's just for your own thinking, like that's kind of like number one now. And then like as an organization, like you really got to sort of think about, well, I would say it's like stages, like adopting the mindset I just sort of talked about with your whole staff, get them thinking about using it this way and thinking about their jobs in sort of an AI enhanced way. And that will lead to what you might call AI strategy, right? You can't do AI strategy until you've done that part, I think. Like you can sort of plan around AI forces in your industry and what it's changing, but you won't truly understand it if your people aren't really living it each day. And once you have sort of that relationship with it, then you'll sort of be able to understand, oh, okay, this is, we were playing with recipes before, and now we're actually baking cakes. And now like we can start adjusting the recipe. I don't know, this analogy, I kind of lost it. It wasn't quite the right one, but that's, you kind of know what I mean. You need to have some experience, and beyond just the experience, like some real like thoughtfulness about your use of AI before you can take it to the next level. So, that's kind of where I would, the main advice I would give to people. It's like, AI is a collaborator, and that's like its sort of primary role these days. Not just a place where you just get stuff.
I love that. I love that distinction. Right. Oh shoot. Sorry. Okay. Hold on.
No problem. A little editing to do. I see you're frozen, but I didn't want to say anything.
Okay, I'm back. No, yeah. I have a second computer here, and sometimes when the screensaver goes on, it causes me to freeze. So like my camera is connected to the second computer.
Yeah.
So anyway, I need an AI to like fix this problem for me. Apparently.
Yeah, you can do it.
Anyway, all right. Well, all right, so I'll just wrap it up here, basically. Sure. Yeah, so Pete, really appreciate your time today. Appreciate you taking time to share with us. Just, you've been on this really incredible journey here of just really diving into the weeds on how these tools are impacting not just media, but really everybody, right? I think anybody, irrespective of your profession or what you're focusing in on, like, that can benefit from some of the insights you've gleaned over the last couple of years here. So congratulations on the project. Very inspiring. I've been following you for, I think, since you started, actually. So I've been like, wow, like that's like a pretty, if you're going to pick a niche to specialize in, it's a pretty good one. So congratulations for that.
Thank you. Thanks, brother.
And appreciate you coming on the show. And why don't you just give yourself a quick plug one last time here? How can folks find you to get in touch or to learn more?
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, Aaron. This has been a great conversation. I don't often get into the details of what went on at CoinDesk, but it was a good time. Yeah. People can reach out to me either on LinkedIn, Pete Pachal, or you can email me, pete@mediacopilot.ai. But I would definitely encourage you, please subscribe to the newsletter. I'm on Substack. It's just the Media Copilot. And if you're interested in courses, I offer those. And you should find them on my website, or again, just email me, get in touch. We'll do something.
Awesome. So thanks, Pete, again. And thanks everyone for watching. And we'll be back with another episode of DWeb Decoded.